Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well. I was just listening to this news about Guthrie's mom, Savannah Guthrie's mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, how does that happen?
What do you mean? Somebody went in and got her. Don't know if it was they the ransom note is real or if they just planned to kill her to get money earlier on her dying. I don't know. But I mean, that somebody could have done it so that it looks like a kidnapping, but it's not, and it could be a kidnapping. I don't know.
Hmm.
My question is I don't mean to be ugly, I don't mean to be morbid, but I don't understand why it's they breaking into regular TV programming. I mean, just because Savannah Guthrie's on TV, she's not.
Okay.
I'm not catching on to this. I mean,
Yeah,
people get gone every day. We don't have them on TV.
yeah,
That's well,
yeah. One guy commented that his daughter's missing and he's not rich. So,
yeah, but she's not richer on TV.
yeah,
And so I don't mean to minimalize what's happened to this family, but I don't understand why you're breaking in on regular TV or on other news. And that's what led to CBS News at 6:30. That's what led to news tonight about a
yeah,
10-minute story.
yeah,
I'm
How
I'm
many
I'm not
people are
understanding
interested by
that,
the
but
minute?
those folks look after their own. I can tell you that it's like a national crisis.
yeah.
Um,
That's true.
but I don't want to. I don't want to minimize anybody's pain
No,
and
I agree.
suffering.
I
Every life matters.
yeah,
Every life matters.
yeah. That was my
Well, we
name
got
backwards.
new faces tonight, different than the weekend. Um, and so we're just back to our regular group again. We had, due to weather issues and others, we had some folks join us, but I enjoyed them this weekend. Having everybody, that was good, but I'm glad to see our folks back. Uh, Still waiting on one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. Just one. Just waiting on Alicia, I think. We'll move on. All right. It's good to see everybody tonight. We have two presentations tonight. James and Sean will be presenting book chapters tonight. But before we get to that, I want to make sure that we understand, go back to our shell. And for those of you who weren't with us this weekend, we'll catch you up quickly. So let me share my screen. All right. So if we look at when we go to face-to-face weekends, if we click on weekend one, you will see the five things. You'll see all the videos from the weekend are right here. If you want to go back and why anybody would want to watch me, I have no notion. But you have the Sunday ones, you have your colleagues and their presentations, which were great, by the way. So here are the assignment, policy actor assignment. Now, that was just a short, we covered that topic on Saturday, and it's kind of a response to what we went over on Saturday, that the real policy actors are not even in the school business. They're at the county commissioner and above level because they're who funds schools. Schools can't fund themselves. School boards are unempowered. They don't generate tax revenue. So that was just a couple of sentence response to that one. And then you had a flow chart about your district, and then you had your crisis assignment. Those three don't have to be very big. The organizational chart can simply be a copy and paste from your school district. Then you had two assignments that were a little bit more in scope, your role and your success assignments. Um, I don't care if they're PowerPoints or not. Generally, people do. If they are, don't make them very long. Big ideas. And so those are the things, and those are the drop boxes. That's what was due from the weekend. All right, weekend 2 coming up. Now you're going to say it says Sunday 1 assignment. Yeah, we had to move some stuff around. Remember, we had to move. So you got Sunday 1 and Sunday 2 that will be due on that weekend, along with ethics scenario 1 and ethics scenario 2. And you say, well, what are those Sunday 1 and Sunday 2 assignments? Well, right here. You just open this document right here and it tells you what they are. There's Sunday 1, there's Sunday 2. And then, of course, Sunday 3 will be due on Sunday 3. The difference is we had to move some stuff because of being online and virtual. We had to move some things around that we would normally do. So we'll do Sunday ones. We'll do both Sunday 1 and Sunday 2 on the second Sunday, and we'll do the regular 2 presentations to catch up from where we are. I didn't want to. We wanted to get out by 1 o'clock on Sunday, just to be honest. And if I added more presentations, we would have been there another, what, 2 hours because we had so many people. And so I'd already made an executive decision that if we were going to get out by 1, we were going to have to cut something. So we pushed it back. Um, so, and we actually got out. Did we get, I think we might have got out a few minutes early actually. But that was the whole point. We had to push some stuff back because we had some extra people with us. And I realized we'd never be able to get it all done. All right, and then we have weekend 3, as you can see here. You click to open that, and you've got your Sunday 3 assignment. Again, you've got your ethics scenario 3 and ethics scenario 4, and then obviously you have your culminating presentation for the semester where you get up and tell us about your policy analysis, your evidence. Now, it doesn't have to be long or drawn out, but by then you should have it done. You tell us what you found, what policy you analyzed, and how it came out. And it simply says if you open that up, present your final policy analysis, tasking evidence. But again, it's up to you how you do that. And so those are the things that will be due that last Sunday. Again, your policy analysis, your 2 ethics, and your Sunday 3 assignment from that document right there. All right, everybody got how this worked. We've had to do a little adjust, but we're good. All right, now looking at our weekly schedule. Remember to keep looking at the weekly schedule. Tonight we have James with Essex chapters 1 and 2, and then we have Fowler's chapters 1 and 2 with Sean. We won't have class next Thursday, and then we'll be online the 19th. We'll miss that, and then that will take us into our residency weekend at the end of February, 1st of March, and that's when we will be done. All right. Anybody have any questions? So tonight, without any further ado, I will stop my share, turn my camera off to everybody's relief so that James can share his screen and tell us about the first 2 chapters in the Essex book.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Can you all see the presentation?
We can.
Okay, perfect.
And thank you for doing black and white.
Not a problem. I thought about you. All
Yeah.
right. So I have chapters 1 and 2 of School Law and Public Schools text, and I just felt like this was a really practical 2 chapters for you all, especially any new school leaders in the building. Just some of the information that it kind of covered. I will share with you as a new principal. I have found myself in spaces sometimes where I'm the only one that knows any of the laws. So it is important to kind of know the expectation because you just never know what you're going to be faced with for day to day as a school leader. All right. So I have some notes here. Hold on one second. All right. So it is imperative, one, as school leaders, that you know all of the expectations. So there are local guidelines that we follow, state and federal, as we talked about last weekend. It's important that you know this information because, again, as the superintendent, which we all plan to be future superintendents, you are the one that's going to set that bar of making sure that your principals are following those expectations and your senior leadership is going to follow those expectations. The Bill of Rights is that primary document, that people really focus on those freedoms that we're entitled to in the U.S. Constitution. And it is your duty to make sure that your staff is upholding that expectation. And what you tend to find is that's how our court cases happen with staff members, families, or kids who challenge, hey, I feel like I was treated unfairly, and they take items to court. It is typically because something has been broken. They feel like, and they are challenging it in the courts. As you will see in our text, and we're going to cover this over the next few weeks, as Dr. Lamb just shared, there are some very powerful court cases that have kind of changed the way education runs. I will give you a very good example of that. Is I remember clearly when I was in second grade, we used to line up and say our grace before we went to lunch. So there was a time where this was okay in public schools, but when people challenge things and your rules get changed, those things have to go away. So it's just very important for us to keep up with what's happening to make sure that we are making sure our districts are operating properly. All right. So some of the key amendments that we want to keep up with is First Amendment, of course, is speech. Everyone has that freedom of speech. The Fourth Amendment of privacy, especially in this AI era. So even as I logged in tonight, I had to consent to the AI piece. So just making sure that you are mindful of that people still have their rights when it comes to privacy. Protection against self-incrimination. The Eighth Amendment is protection against cruel and unusual punishment. And again, you don't hear about that one much, other than somewhere there's some, corporal punishments or things that just shouldn't be happening in schools anyway. The 10th Amendment kind of speaks to the state having that power. And I think that's where, we're saying you have to be mindful of that because some states don't always have the best interest with holding that much power. So sometimes, we do need the federal government to kind of step in. And that 14th Amendment is due process. Again, just to give you a very real case that I had experienced myself as a new principal is just being mindful of, as you are overseeing, new APs, new principals, making sure that when there is a discipline issue that, sides of the story are being heard. It is very easy, for someone to quickly pull a camera and want to issue a discipline, but it can't happen that way. You have to give, kids their chance to talk. So make sure that you're just kind of following the expectations. So sometimes some of these expectations cannot be followed because people are moving swiftly. But what the law is, and you want to make sure that you are abiding by that law. All right. This slide just, going over vocabulary a bit, statutes, to make sure that we all have a good understanding as, school leaders of this idea that the statutes are pretty much what we run by. So, the federal government has given power to the states, and the states give power over to the school boards to kind of navigate how schools should run. So it's important that we know as the statutes and make sure that those are things that have been properly followed. Again, there are a lot of historic court cases. I did not list them all here, but it's just known, and we'll cover them all in class. This idea that court cases, whenever there's a big issue, that it ends up in the courts, and the courts issue their verdict or their message that they send out to the educators of what to follow. All right, so again, here I just kind of have my chart of how things work under state agencies. So the state agencies have a board of education that oversees the direction of the public schools. That state board of education gives power to the local school boards to navigate the school policy and administration. Okay. So typically the way it was explained to us was our superintendent is who works directly under that board of education. And his job along with the board is to oversee the school board policies. And to make sure that all of the schools are functioning properly and following the expectations. All right, chapter 2 took us into religion and the public schools. I will tell you, we did not use this book in my MSA program. Dr. Lamb, I'm not sure if Gardner-Webb uses it in their MSA program. But one of the things I did like about this specific text is that it gives you a little guide in every section to kind of show you the basics. And I think that's really, really good to have because sometimes you can get lost in just reading about all of the big court cases and all the vocabulary terms. But these little guides that are kind of page 21 and 44 are two that I highlighted, where they just give you the practical things that you should know as a leader to kind of make sure that you are abiding by the expectations. I think this religious one is an important one to us just because we live in the Bible Belt. So a lot of times in our minds, some things are kind of okay to us because we feel like, I'm a Christian, like these things are okay. But this chapter really spoke to fairness, being a part of how we navigate things, because you don't want to give space for one group when another group may want to do the same thing. And you're like, I don't want that group to do it. So always trying to be fair when you make decisions. All right. So some of the takeaways was just this idea that, routine prayer is not a thing. So you cannot step in as a school leader to demand students pray. But there is some segue in there where students can decide that they want to pray. It just can't be mandated by the adults in the building. Silent meditation was the same way. The court said they do not want to decide on the silent meditation piece, but again, if kids want to do that, they are allowed to do that. Um, a very important note that I took was this idea that when in doubt, always consult with your legal counsel. So again, many things come up in schools now. I would tell you one that I just noticed is there was a period where these faith T-shirts kind of came out, and staff members would want to wear something like that. So just always be mindful that you don't want to offend people because the teacher right piece is kind of in this text also of educators having their own rights. And yes, there are some rights to an extent, but you don't want to offend others. So sometimes we do things not trying to cause harm, but remembering that teachers or any staff member is a role model to the kids. So you don't want to cause harm when you are trying to, wear your religious wear or um, just represent things you believe in. Also, facilities use came up because a lot of times, people want to rent buildings. So again, just making sure that you're not renting to one religious group, but not renting to another religious group. So there has to be some fairness in how you operate and do business. And I felt like that was important for us as school leaders. All right. When it comes to the evolution theory, again, there's been a lot of debate about this. I remember this from my time in education, high school days. I feel like is when it came up the most. But it has ended up that the courts have left this up to the boards to decide of kind of how things operate between the Bible and science. Because there's always been conflict over which should be taught in the schools. So it sounds like we've never just had a solid decision of this is what it's going to be. But the boards can decide how districts will function in terms of what they're going to teach. But if the Bible is being taught, still this idea of making sure that not too much opinion is going inside of it, but just sticking to the actual text itself to teach children. All right, so I just spoke to this idea of making sure you're not offending as the professionals, and again, that is just kind of how we want to always operate. This idea that teachers, all staff members have their rights also, but you don't want them to kind of take advantage of that right. And I don't think they would do it intentionally, but just reminding them that, when it comes to appearance, when it comes to them operating in their freedoms, if it's going to cause harm to a student, you don't want those things to happen. All right. And there's my reference.
Mm-hmm. Very good. You can stop your share. All right. Let me look right quick for something here. All right. Okay. Let me share my screen. And we're going to do a little quick catch up here. Let me get back to here. All right. All right. Let's talk about due process to start with. Okay, due process. Um, was a little late in coming for me, unfortunately. By the time due process was around, I'd already been had my hide wore out so many times it didn't matter by then. But due process didn't come to schools until 1969, that kids have rights. Didn't have any rights when I was in school. They just jerk you up and trail you. Didn't have to have a reason. Didn't have to tell you why. Didn't have to do anything other than just thrash you good. But since 1969, so due process has two parts. Now, this is really, really, really important. If you don't remember anything else tonight, due process has two parts: substantive and procedural. Substance is what are we supposed to do? Procedural is what did we do? Did we follow it? And there is the differential right there. All right. Substantive due process must be announced through disciplinary data manuals. Now, the data manual says that comes out from the General Assembly and the State School Board. DPI writes that manual. We talked about this Sunday. They authorize DPI to interpret and send a manual out for what you to do. Now, if you notice in that disciplinary manual, they delegate the authority for consequences to the local school board through a code of conduct. The state says you can't do these things in our school and you have to report if it happens. They don't say what the punishment is. That is delegated to the local school board, that district code of conduct. So those must be in place, and they are. The state writes the manual, your board adopts a code of conduct every year. From there, as James said, student has the right to be informed of the charges against them, has the right to hear evidence, witnesses against them, has the right to respond to the charges and give their side of the story, has the right to present witnesses, and the right to be treated or not be treated arbitrarily or capriciously. All right, and then that's what you're supposed to do, and then procedural is whether you did it or not, and that's where we always get in trouble. All right, now let's understand arbitrary and capricious. Where's the beard? There's the beard. All right. Me and Carl were at the Denver campus and we were out behind the building smoking. And Jessica came along and found us. Where's Jessica? There she is. And she caught us smoking. All right. She sent Carl back to class and she just pulled out her gun. She's known to carry a gun and just shot me, graveyard dead, right there on the spot. All right. That's an example of both arbitrary and capricious. She punished me and not Carl for the same thing. That would be arbitrary. You have to be careful about that. That's the standard. And then the capricious part is in the handbook, it says the most you can do for me for smoking is suspend me from school for 3 days. Shooting me is a little excessive. That's called capricious. So you have to make sure that that you treat everybody the same and not be arbitrary, and you have to understand what your code of conduct is. You better read it and know your levels or your tiers, what potentially you can do or not do, and you cannot exceed the maximum allowable from the code of conduct set by your school board. That's the one that gets people in the most trouble, is they punish somebody that especially dress code. Oh my God, dress code drives you crazy. Even in my time, the only thing that I ever did on dress code was I had a boy that wore dresses, and I sent him home not because he was wearing a dress, but because his dress was too short. I wouldn't let girls wear him that short, so he had to go home and change his dress too. You have to be consistent in the application. If you catch me and Carl, you got to deal with me and Carl. You can't just say, "Well, Carl, I know you." Um, and then you have to make sure that you stay within your tier or level according to your handbook. Your handbook's got a range, a tier or a level system. So you can't be arbitrary or capricious. You can't punish one and not the other, and you can't give more punishment than your handbook allows. That's where most administrators get in trouble, is arbitrary and capricious. But again, you got to understand in due process, what are they supposed to get? Those 7 things that I had listed there. And then did you carry them out? Now, I can't keep you from getting sued. but the idea here is just win. You know, what was it? Al Davis, the Raver, said, just win, baby. That's the idea here, making sure that you're following what you're supposed to be doing. Now, as James said, in the master's level, we use the Principal's Guide to School Law, which is a more practical application of the law. At this level, the doctoral level, we look more at how it's developed, the pathways. We're looking at it from the central office perspective, but still, you got to remember how it has to work even at the grassroots and to understand the policy of it. And that leads me to the last piece, negligence. There's three types of negligence in terms of liability. Now, since 1992, I was a principal in 1992, and yes, I'm that old. We had to go to these statewide meetings, and I remember I was principal in Burke County, so I went to the one in Hickory because for the first time ever, starting in 1992, 34 years ago, it was the Supreme Court said that school administrators and teachers could be held personally liable, that's called a tort, for their misbehavior if they had negligence. The court, the landmark case was in Union County, where Monroe, Marshall, Marvin, all them places are, you know, where you cough because you get chicken feathers and you throw it every time you drive through there. That's where it came from. And so we had to go to all these Richard Schwartz and Associates, even back then, they came out, they did state training up for principals all over the state. We were required to go to understand negligence and that we could be personally liable. So if you had me for 603 school law, those of you who have had, you know, every night I talk about we ain't gonna lose our house. Our job tonight is not to lose our house, to get held personally liable and lose our livelihood, our house, our job, our money, our assets. So there's three types of negligence. Let's go back to the paper again. Let's hit those again right quick. Make sure that we understand the three functions of negligence. All right. The first is nonfeasance. You had a duty to act and you did not. All right. That's when, you know, that was the Big Myers Park case that students were reporting sexual assaults on campus and nothing was happening. That was the last big case in Charlotte was the Myers Park case. Misfeasance, again, that's a civil, unintentionally did the wrong thing. You did the wrong thing. You didn't know it was wrong. You didn't intend for it to be wrong, but it turned out to be wrong. Again, that's a civil charge. Nonfeasance is a civil charge. And then malfeasance. You will be charged now civilly and criminally. You intentionally did the wrong thing. That's people who punish the victim in terms of trying to silence them so that they won't tell it or to punish them for telling it. If you do that, you will face both civil and criminal charges. So those are the types of negligence. You need to understand that. Again, nonfeasance had a duty to act and didn't. Misfeasance, malfeasance. The folks in Uvalde, Texas, they all ended up in court. Why did they end up in court? I'm still with you. Oh, 1 second here. I'm still with you. Why did they end up in court on negligence charges? The school people did and the police did. They weren't all the same, but why did they end up in court? Well, the classroom door had a broken lock on it. And even in North Carolina, how often do you have to have a fire drill in North Carolina by state law, 115C 288G? How often do you have to have a fire drill?
Once a month.
Every month.
Once a month. How often do you have to check your buildings and grounds for safety issues and fire hazards? Twice a month. And file a written report.
Right.
What had been an ongoing problem in the classroom where they went in and killed all the kids, 20-something kids? The door was broken. The lock couldn't lock the door. Uh-oh. That's what the school people got charged with. They propped the door open It's hot in Texas all the time. You can always find a door. Cafeteria is almost always propped open. They have a fan in the door trying to cool the kitchen down. I just walked right through the cafeteria. Went down the hallway until I found a door that wasn't locked, went in and killed all the kids. All right. And so they got charged civilly for not following through and making sure that for propping the door and for making and not fixing the broken door. What about the police? They had a duty to respond. And what did they do? They didn't. They just stood outside and waited till they shot up all their bullets, killing kids. That's an extreme example, but that's what we're talking about here. If you have a duty to respond and don't, that would be negligence. If you do the wrong thing, even if you didn't know it was the wrong thing, that would be negligence. And if you intentionally did the wrong thing, like was alleged at Myers Park, where when the people who would report these assaults happening on campus, they'd punish them for skipping and being out in the woods. That's what we're talking about. So understand the General Assembly appoints the Board of Education in a state. The General Assembly makes laws, the school board, the state school board makes policy, DPI interprets it, puts out manuals, state board delegates authority to your local school board to set policies as well beyond what they do. For example, their policy is these incidents can occur in school. There's punishment if there's too many of them. You have to report them. They don't set the consequences. They delegate that authority to the local board. So you've got to know, well, I've got to follow this disciplinary manual in terms of what I've got to report and what I put in Infinite Campus or Power School, wherever you are in the conversion. The local board, I have to use that document, that code of conduct, when I'm setting the consequence or the punishment for those children. You have to understand the overall how it filters down to your level. Okay? Anybody have any questions on that? Very good. Very good presentation, James. Appreciate that. All right, we're moving on now to Sean with her presentation. Sean, I'll turn my camera off and let you share your screen. Look at us, we're right on time.
Let's see. All right, can everyone see it?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so I had also, hello everybody, nice to see you all tonight. I had policies, Fowler chapters 1 and 2, which is all about policy studies for educational leaders. What is policy? Where does it come from? And power and education. It's a lot of reading, a lot of information in these 2 chapters. So what is policy? Policies are guidelines, principles, or procedures that are adopted to guide decisions and outcomes. Policy is typically more than just laws. A lot of chapter 1 discusses it includes actions as well as inactions, decisions, and patterns. So while a district or a school can have good intentions when they're creating policies, the policy is typically defined by what actually happens, something that's consistent, and it's not just a school, district, or individual school's mission statements, their promises, or their written goals. So as a school leader, it talks about you have to look beyond intent and recognize that pattern, and that reveals the real policy. So it's super dynamic. Policies can be identified through statutes, rules and regulations, court decisions, budgets, and implementation patterns. So policy it can come from federal, state, and local school boards and districts. So if the state sets a mandate, the local board will adopt that into their own policy. They're shaped by political context, economic conditions, and social values. So educators and policymakers speak different languages. Policymakers often lack classroom experience. So school leaders must understand policy to advocate effectively rather than feel powerless. Then it talks about the policy process and the classic policy stages. So you have issue definition, agenda setting, policy formulation, policy adoption, implementation, and evaluation. And this is the graphic that the textbook uses. So you can see the top row are solid arrows and the bottom row are backwards dotted arrows. And they move from right to left because sometimes when a policy issue advances, it can also move back to an earlier stage after reviewing or editing or needing changes to it. Standards-based reform also is in this chapter, and it shows how an issue can become policy. So there were concerns about student achievement. It was defined as a problem. It was placed on a policy agenda, and then it was eventually turned into a law, and had regulations with the local school board. So then on to chapter 2. It talks a lot about power and how it shapes education policy. So power is the ability to influence behavior. Influence can cause action, prevent action, or shape decisions. Power and policy go hand in hand with each other. Administrators already hold power because they represent the state. So leaders are constantly interacting with others and trying to influence or also resist policy. It's usually communicated through language, and it talked about this in the textbook, which I found interesting. And one thing I found true this year, changing positions in the school, principals and superintendents spend most of their time talking. And it gave like a percentage in the text. I think it was like 75% or something like that when they're talking to other leaders and administrators. So then it also talks about the types and uses of power. And so the first table that they give us is about the dimensions of power. So the first dimension is explicit uses of power. So you have different types of power. You have force, like coercion. You have economic dominance, like controlling funding. You have authority, principal enforcing new board policies. And you also have persuasion. So like a principal or an assistant principal creating buy-in for a new initiative. And power depends on resources. So I think money, staffing, time, trust with your teachers, and then also knowledge resources. So are we using data to drive some of our decisions? Then the second dimension of power is the mobilization of bias. So it talked a lot about race, and so discipline policies affecting minorities, or even just tracking those practices against minority students. Parent involvement, so PTA, are they carrying out school priorities? And then again, more about the mobilization of bias. So race, you have unequal access. With gender, there's an underrepresentation of women in administration, and then class, school choice, so favoring families with more resources. And then the third dimension of power was talks about the shaping of consciousness. So unusual empowerment and also unusual disempowerment. So students or families believing they belong in advanced programs, or students believing that certain paths are not for them. So sort of a growth mindset outlook. And then more about power in educational settings. So power flows through the federal, state, district, and school. And informal power often matters more than formal authority. So teachers, parents, and community groups also hold power, and their voices are really strong in shaping the policies that go through the state and the district and the school. So, achieving a policy goal often requires building power. Power determines which issues reach the agenda, whose voices are heard, which solutions are considered legitimate or the best solution. There's also ethical issues surrounding power, so it can advance equity or reinforce injustice. And so it's really important that leaders recognize limits of authority, they avoid coercion, and they act in legally and morally defensible ways. So overall, really, these two chapters talk about policy and what actually happens with it, how power can determine whose version of what should happen wins or gets elected into becoming a policy, and how school leaders need to understand both power and policy to be able to lead ethically and effectively. And then I have my reference.
Excellent. All right. Let's revisit one of the stories that I told over the weekend about the issue that reached the agenda of increasing the credits once we left the traditional AB day where you could get 28, get 24 credits, or then you could make 28 credits. We went from 6 to 7, and then we went to the 4x4 where you could get 32 credits. And Charlotte Mecklenburg had the standard 20 that the state says is the minimum and didn't have any more than that. And so all of a sudden, an item reached the agenda. And again, where'd that item come from? It came from the county commissioners. And at the end of the day, there was no negotiation. It was, you're going to do 28 next year. And that's when Judge Manning said what we were doing in our high schools was akin to genocide. That's that bias. It specifically targeted certain groups. And that was the whole point. Remember, those 5 Republicans ran as the Gang of Five, you Google it, from the 90s, got elected, and part of their deal is we want to punish certain groups and throw them out. And so that power, that coercion, that economic dominance, because they control the funding. But the key thing that Sean said there is there's a standard. She showed the flow chart from chapter 1 of how a policy works its way through to adoption. That's not the real issue. The real issue is, how does that issue make the agenda? Where did it come from? That's why in the policy actor's assignment, you've got to understand the first and most powerful policy actor in your school district is not in your school district. It's the county commissioners, because all the budget flows through them. And they basically held the district hostage for a bunch of money unless you adopt 28 credits. We're not going to pass your budget. We're not going to fund your budget unless you move to 28 units. So what you have to ask every time you see another policy come along, where did it come from? Not the path it takes to get adopted. It might have to go back a step forward, go to committee, look, but where did it come from? That's the definition of power, is to get your agenda item on the agenda, your issue on the agenda. And you have to be careful. You have this brilliant idea. You're a principal, or you're the superintendent, or you're in the central office, and you have this brilliant idea. You better understand the law of unintended consequences. Whose ox are you going to go with? Are the people who are really in charge, that's the people with the money, are they going to like this or not? And the majority of policies that I've seen in the last 20 years, most specifically, since we politicized all of this, don't come from school people. They do not come from school people. I'm still with you. My signal comes in and out. What about the school calendar? Where does the school calendar come from at the local level? I was on the calendar committee in Charlotte because I was senior high chair. Back in the day, before we had different regions or districts or learning communities or whatever you want to call them, when we were just a singular district, the power inside the district was the senior high chair, the middle school chair, the elementary chair, those 3 principals. They elected a chair every year. And they worked with the central office administration, and that's where things, the internal policies came from. It's completely different now. But when I was senior high chair, that meant I had a seat on the calendar committee. And through force of personality, persuasion, or they thought I might thrash them, I got the early calendar adopted for the first time. We ran it for 1 year, where we started on August 1st and we finished the first semester by Christmas. Why did I want to do that? Because we were converting to the 4x4, where you change semesters, you change courses. And so wanted to have a calendar that fit that 4x4 block structure. So we would be done with the first semester by Christmas. Got it in, got it passed, got it through. Second year came up, went to the calendar committee and they said, we're not going to do that calendar again. Well, why not? Well, the county commissioners don't like it. The people in the vacation lobby, excuse me, across the state don't like it. No, excuse me, because it hurts vacation rentals in August. And they went a step further. That's why school can't start legally still until August 25th because of the vacation lobby, the real estate people, housing rentals. Anybody seen the cost? What happens in months of June, July, and August to the cost of vacation rentals? They're all for a week at the beach. You have to rent for a whole week, all the houses at the beach. What happens during those 3 months? They double the price. And it was taking a whole month away from their rental income. And they lobbied the General Assembly, who passed a law based on what we did in Charlotte. The response to that was they passed a law where we could never do that again. That would be me. So I was not the fan favorite of the politicians after having forced that through. And so I just resigned from the calendar committee. I mean, if you're, how many times have you had an AB count, two different calendars in your district, and everybody voted for one of them, and they adopted the other one, and the response is, well, you didn't pick the right one. Well, we had two. There is no right one. Again, that's power. That's what we're talking about. The power was so intense. Not only did the county commissioners pitch a fit, the legislatures passed a law in North Carolina that you can't start school till August 25th because of what we did in Charlotte that year. So you've got to understand there is a process to get a policy adopted. But what you've got to know that to avoid making a career ending mistake or a career damaging decision is, where do these policies come from? Who started that? How did that get on the agenda? And know, if you want to put something on the agenda, the law of unintended consequences, whose ox is this going to gore if we were to pass this particular policy? Speaking, going further into Sean's presentation, one of the things that you heard me say, the only thing that I enforced is you can't wear a dress too short. Where you get into bias, especially racial bias, is hair and clothing. You got to be real careful on those. And so as long as you're covered up and nothing's hanging out, um, but then you have districts who want you to go out and enforce these policies that a lot of them are racial or gender based. They only affect certain groups. And therein lies the problem that you get into with that is that you're being asked to enforce something that is targeting specific groups. And don't think that doesn't happen, especially in the last 5 years or so. We're going backwards as far as we can in terms of equity, diversity, and inclusion, as fast as we can go. I will hand it. Now, the North Carolina schools, some of the public schools, but most of the colleges have had to remove a lot of the DEI stuff that they were doing. I will commend South Carolina. They've not done that because they never put it in to start with. They were always backwards and didn't pretend not to be. And so North Carolina pretended to be progressive and had to back up. South Carolina never pretended to be progressive. They never had those to begin with. You can decide which is worse, but neither one of them, nobody's a hero in that situation. But a lot of the policies are intended to harm certain groups and single people out. And you got to be careful about those. And I like that last thing is that power is really economic dominance. That's what this is really all about, is economic dominance in terms of school boards are unempowered. That's why we use that term. They're unempowered. Power is economic. Power is money. Power is economic dominance. If you have the money, you get your way. And since school boards, by definition, in North and South Carolina are unempowered, you have to be careful and understand that line, and you can use the power of persuasion only so far. And one of the things that I learned at the highest levels of power is arguing for the right thing to do for kids. You don't even get a seat at the table at that level. It's all about the Benjamins. As Randy Moss said, straight cash, homie. It's just about the money. And if you don't have any or don't have any way to generate any, then you don't really have a seat at the table. You need to know that. That's the life of upper level school administration. You are hat in hand, always. All right. Anybody have anything for the good of the group tonight?
No, but I did have a quick question. The thing that you were talking about in Monroe, what was that again? You said it was the hold on,
Tort liability. You can
tort
trace
liability.
tort liability in North Carolina to a court ruling in Union County. That case brought about tort liability for school administrators for the first time, that you could be sued over negligence personally, not just the district. As you know, in the Myers Park case, the district petitioned the court to separate from the principal and said that, that they didn't want to be held, they wanted it separated because their policies were such that none of this was supposed to happen. And if it did happen, it wasn't with their blessing or support. And so the district successfully petitioned the court, and the case was against the district and against the principal individually at Myers Park.
Yeah, I'm Myers Park.
Yeah,
I'm transparent. I'm there.
yeah. And
We
so,
got a lot of trees.
yeah,
We're a mini college campus.
yeah. Back in the day, I mean, in the way back in the 70s and 80s, kids at Myers Park got an hour for lunch and they could leave campus.
Yeah.
And it's what I mean. They had an open campus. Um, and even when they stopped them from leaving campus, supposedly, they would just leave anyway. Go to the woods, misbehave in the woods, or cut through and go to local eating places or whatever. But a lot of bad stuff happens in the woods, and so according to the plaintiffs in the case, when they would go to the woods, they would be sexually assaulted, and when they would report it, they'd just be punished for going to the woods. That was the crux of the Myers Park case. But CMS successfully petitioned the court to separate from the principal, and he had to stand on his own, have his own attorneys.
Yeah. We put a lot of things in place since that time.
Yeah,
So
not bad things.
a lot has changed.
Yeah. I used to have to spend a lot of time over there for all the stuff that was going on in that open campus.
Yeah.
Um, I have too many stories to tell and not enough time to tell them. All right. Anybody have anything else for the good of the group? We don't just stay on because of the time. We get our work done, we move on. All right, let's look at our calendar again as a reminder. So I'll share our calendar. I was on the way out tonight. We're at the benediction here. I'm here just as I am, playing in the background. For all you Baptists in attendance, you know what I'm talking about. All right, so let's look at our schedule again. We are on Zoom tonight on February 5th. We do not have a class a week from tonight. I will see you again in 2 weeks. And then the next time that I see you will be for our residency weekend on Saturday the 28th and Sunday the 1st. We'll be in Charlotte, looking at our weekend assignments. Please remember, weekend 2, you will be the Sunday 1 and Sunday 2 assignments will be due in your presentation on Sunday. You'll need to cover both of those. Remember, right here in this document, right here, tells us what the Sunday 1 and Sunday 2 assignments are. It's right here. So those will be due, your attendance bonus and your 2 ethics scenarios. So on that Sunday, when you do your 30-minute presentation or less, you have to do assignment 1 Sunday, assignment 2 Sunday, outlined in this document, And then you have these two, your ethics scenario assignments. And then you can do the attendance bonus if you want to. So that's what's due. So I will see you in 2 weeks for class at that time. Let's go back. We'll look at that. When we're back together on the 19th, Amy and Stephanie will have presentations from Essex and from Fowler. All right. I think we're caught up on everything we're supposed to do, and we're still 5 minutes. I think we did an excellent job tonight. We got out in an hour or less. So that's always our goal. All right. I will see you in 2 weeks. Everybody behave yourself and stay safe in this weather. Love you, mean it.